while this horrible situation has gotten a particularly high amount of attention, there are roughly 1,000 cases a year of a train derailing.
Developing right now, residents in East Palestine, Ohio are under expanded evacuation orders after a 50-car train derailment. Emergency crews are working to vent toxic chemicals from 5 cars near the Pennsylvania state line in order to reduce the threat of an explosion. The train derailed Friday night the wreckage has been smoldering, as you see there, ever since.
How do you, having spent your life assessing things like chemical spills, how do you assess the condition of East Palestine tonight?
It's very troublesome. These poor individuals, through no fault of their own, became victims of systemic failures within the rail transportation system, and it manifested itself in this mushroom cloud that they had to experience in their town. One of the reasons why I made the comment about we nuke the town with chemicals is because there was somebody from Darlington, Pennsylvania, who was videoing the cloud that had went over his property, and you could see fallout coming out of the cloud going onto his property. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, it reminds you of one of those apocalyptic shows where the nuclear fallout's coming out. And I thought about it, and I says, well, yeah, we basically did nuke a whole town just to get a railroad going, back in service.
But residents say they're skeptical and scared by mixed messages on water and air safety in the last 2 weeks. Some reporting sore throats, vomiting, and other symptoms.
The chemicals that we're being told are safe in the air, that's definitely not safe.
For the animals?
It's for animals or people.
A small business owner that was, their business was right in front of where the explosion was. They can't get anything out of the EPA. The federal government came in for a few days, took over their entire business, would not let them in, okay? But also wouldn't talk to them and wouldn't give them a plan, wouldn't tell them anything. And that's exactly how it's going for everybody that's in this town.
This morning, people in East Palestine, Ohio, bracing for a new threat stemming from the toxic crash site where a Norfolk Southern train carrying vinyl chloride derailed 2 weeks ago.
In the meantime, again, hard to believe, the EPA says there are no levels of concern in the air in terms of any particulate, any carcinogens that might still be floating around. The fallout from this, the literal fallout and now the political fallout stretching here to Washington, as the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, is under a great deal of fire for not paying what many believe to be insufficient attention to this situation here.
Are you seeing effects? I mean, it seems from our perspective, hundreds of miles away, like there are dangerous chemicals in your town. Are you seeing the effects of that?
We are seeing them locally. Inside of our bodies, what we're experiencing. Local fish in our creeks have died. Oily sheens and coloration in our water. Constant smell of burning plastics and chemicals in the air. Issues with our dog, vomiting, acting lethargic. It's scary stuff here, Tucker.
On the train derailment in Ohio, Secretary Buttigieg has gotten some criticism, much of it in Ohio, some of it from Democrats and Republicans, who argue that he waited too long to respond, and then he's seemed to be fixated on trying to deflect blame to the previous administration. So does the president, is he satisfied with the government's response to this derailment? And does he have confidence in?
Yes, absolutely. I can answer that very quickly and very with confidence from here that we do have absolute confidence in Mayor Pete.
First time they heard from the White House, Buttigieg has been largely silent on this train derailment and the toxic chemicals on the train, except on Twitter. He tweeted this: "We're constrained by law on some areas of rail regulation, like the braking rule withdrawn by the Trump administration in 2018 because of a law passed by Congress in 2015. But we are using the powers we do have to keep people safe," is what Pete Buttigieg tweeted.
But Buttigieg yesterday, Taylor, spoke to the National County Conference in Washington, D.C., but no mention of this train derailment that happened on February 3rd. However, he did attempt some humor about the transportation industry. Watch.
We've faced issues from container shipping to airline cancellations. Now we got balloons.
You don't
bring families back with their kids and their loved ones and then tell them to scrub with Dawn?
10 of the cars that derailed were carrying hazardous materials. 5 were hauling vinyl chloride. Okay, so the question on everyone's mind, what caused all this?
Ohio's governor now calling for additional resources from the federal government. HHS and CDC crews now deploying. Andrew Dimber, ABC News, New York.
These aren't storm clouds. This is the fucking shit that they burn off, the fucking shit they burn off in East Palestine. This is not fucking storm clouds. Look at it. This is over Darlington.
We went out to these areas and were able to spot some dead fish in Leslie Run and Bull Creek. At a press conference, officials told us they are monitoring the situation.
There are literally hundreds of dead fish, all coming from the one creek that's coming from the wreckage. That fish in this one is actually probably about a foot long, so it's not just the little ones. And then you see a bunch of little ones scattered around it. Little beaver runs into big beaver, runs through our state park, and there's dead fish everywhere.
We're finally learning more than a week out now that Norfolk Southern has responded by providing the EPA with a specific list of which chemicals were in which cars. That's all information that should have been provided to state emergency planning officials and first responders. And would have been required to be provided ahead of time had the rulemaking under the Obama administration not restricted the definition of what's known as a high hazard flammable terrain.
The lever has done such good comprehensive reporting about all of the kind of regulatory choices that led to this moment, including the choice not to require the newer brake system in all of these cars, and of course the ongoing labor discussions we've been having ever since the Biden administration stopped the rail strike at the end of last year about whether or not the staffing issues and the precision railroad scheduling choices also led to this crisis.
Unions were representing the best interest of its members. They were having poor working conditions due to Biden's economy and other decisions he'd made, including long work hours, including not being able to travel so far from their office areas so if they were on call. But then you can't blame the BNSF and these other railroad companies either, because they were representing really the best interest of us, the consumers, getting food delivered to us, getting petroleum taken across the country, all things that are done by railroad. What you can blame is the Biden administration, because they're the ones that have, created vaccine mandates, which these railroad workers were covered by. They had to get vaccinated in order to keep their jobs. And then on top of that, they were also, Biden's printing out money like it's going out of fashion, and basically incentivizing people not to work. So you have these railroad shortages, these railroad workers shortages, because of what the Biden administration has done.
Facility where this video was shot is about 20 miles from East Palestine, where that derailment happened, right? So the camera, when the train is passing that camera, when the footage was captured, this was around 8:12 that evening. The derailment happened, as I mentioned, 20 miles later at around 8:55. So this brings up the question of, okay, when was the crew on board made aware that there was an issue? So
the chemical spill from a train derailment in Ohio did reach the Ohio River, potentially affecting 25 million people.
You don't hear anything, Tommy, from any of the environmentalists, the windmill solar panel crew. But who do you hear from? Far left squad member Ilhan Omar actually ripping Buttigieg's response, writing, quote, East Palestine railroad derailment will have a significant negative impact on the health and well-being of the residents for decades, and there's almost zero media attention. We need congressional inquiry and direct action from Pete Buttigieg to address this tragedy. So, Tommy, how bad are you at your job when even Ilhan Omar calls you out?
And now, earlier in the segment, we just saw Karine Jean-Pierre kind of giving, I will say, from my perspective, a kind of subjectively wishy-washy answer about how we're monitoring the situation, et cetera. What we know is that, for example, Joe Biden could have used can continue to use executive authority to give the rail workers the sick days that they were requesting at the end of the last year. There was a conversation about whether or not some of the staffing issues precipitated this crisis. The fact that these 2 mile-long trains are being staffed and inspected by only 2-man crews. In this case, I believe there was a third person who was a trainee conductor on the train. And so, what do you say to folks who perhaps are in the Democratic Party saying, hey, we're doing what we can, we're taking, the decisions are being made for the best interest of the people. From your perspective, what will we be seeing if truly the best interest of the people were being reflected here as opposed to perhaps some political or economic interests?
Top Biden officials and rail company employees avoiding a town hall in East Palestine. Concerned residents searching for answers after a toxic train derailment released toxic chemicals. So the city's mayor also says Transportation Secretary Buttigieg is missing in action.
I don't know. Your guess is as good as me. Yesterday was the first time I heard anything from the White House.
You mentioned going back today to have the air inspected. How did that go?
Our air inspection came back good, but I actually asked for the railroad to come down and look at my house. The issue is they are testing for the air, but they're not testing the soil or the water. Our front door is about 5 to 7 steps to Sulphur Run Creek. It has embankments on both sides of it. So, when the water swells, when it rains, all that water is going to rise halfway up that hillside, and those chemicals are going to go into the soil.
I spoke to a couple just a little bit ago who wanted their home tested to see if it was contaminated because they live close to the site. Norfolk Southern basically asked them to sign a hold harmless agreement, which would indemnify them. The couple refused. Take a look.
Last week, Caitlin says that Norfolk Southern, the company that operated the train, came to the door to test for toxins in their home. But before they could, they would need to sign this document.
We were told that they were an independent testing agency. Before they could enter the premises, they handed us a contract. The contract was essentially, to be able to get onto the property, but also at the bottom was a hold harmless agreement.
It states that upon signature, the landowner agrees to hold harmless the company for any and all legal claims, personal injury, or property damage. She refused to sign.
So if I get this straight, Norfolk Southern essentially asked you to sign a hold harmless agreement in exchange for testing?
Correct.
If I have symptoms myself, I know other people have been having symptoms. My symptoms have been like my eyes pulsating, headaches, tinglingness a little bit.
Yeah, Transportation Secretary sends us a tweet when there are Americans that are concerned for the safety of themselves and their family members and their pets. We get a tweet from our Transportation Secretary. Guys, we talk about this administration all the time and not studying for the test, but I would say it's much worse than that. They're refusing to even take the test. And when Pete talks about things like racial disparity and diversity and racism over and over again, I don't believe it's because he's truly concerned about those things. I think it's because he doesn't want to do his actual job. And when you talk about feelings and emotions and when you race bait continually, you don't actually have to solve any problems. You just convince everybody that they're an oppressor or they're a victim, and you don't have to do your actual job. And that's what we're seeing yet again, not only with Pete Buttigieg, with his Biden administration as a whole. There's a lack of transparency. There's a lack of true caring and understanding for what the American people are going through. It's at the point now where it is blatantly obvious and it is completely unacceptable.
Why didn't he visit it? Why did he spend his time in Washington cracking these lame jokes? I have no sympathy for him. He seems to be not where the action is. Train derailments, for instance. Guess how many
there,
train derailments there are on average in America?
Yeah, but my point to you is he's never there. We have all of these crises, and I'll scroll them again if you want. He's never there.
We have heard way too many stories from generations past of infrastructure where you got a neighborhood, often a neighborhood of color, that finally sees the project come to them, but everyone in the hard hats on that project looking like, doing the good paying jobs, don't look like they came from anywhere near the neighborhood.
Oh, so he's mad that there's white construction workers. Okay. Anything about the environment, Pete? Anything about the catastrophe, this train derailment with the transportation secretary? No, got nothing.
While this horrible situation has gotten a particularly high amount of attention, there are roughly 1,000 cases a year of a train derailment. There are roughly 1,000 cases a year of a train derailment.